First, I'd like to welcome you all here. It is really gratifying to see the continued interest that still exists relative to the fate of the World War II German rocket development teams. As the war was winding down and both Soviet and Allied armies were sweeping through Germany, both sides had programs to entice German engineers to join their side and help them with future rocket developments. The question is, who got those engineers? Where did they go? And most importantly, what did they do? As World War II was ending and Germany was occupied and defeated, it was obvious that the alliance between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union would also be coming to an end. This was evident almost before the war itself was actually over, as each side pursued their own objectives in Europe as well as worldwide. It was also evident to both sides that German rocket technology, which was developed during the war and employed as an extremely effective terror weapon, may be useful to each of them. Thus, German technology was a much sought after commodity, as both sides, the West led by the US and the Soviet Union, recognized the potential future value and the use of rockets as a delivery system. Thus, German technology became a prize, and both sides attempted to recruit German engineers and scientists to their respective countries. As witnesses to the German rocket developments, both the Soviet Union and the United States knew that rocket development and future technology was going to be a critical military necessity. Using rockets to deliver large explosive devices and ultimately nuclear weapons was a distinct possibility in 1945. And both sides knew that the other side was after that capability. Why was it important? Just watch. During World War II, German technology concentrated on developing the terror weapons of their day, notably the V-1 and particularly V-2 rockets. At the end of the war, both the Soviet Union and the United States recognized the future potential of these type of weapons, particularly if their range and payload could be increased. What was the easiest way to incorporate that technology? Entice the German scientists who developed it to their respective countries. The US launched a secret program to recruit and move former Nazi scientists to the US, as described by authors Anne Jacobson and Bryn Krim in their respective works on the secret operation conducted by the US known as Operation Paperclip. The corresponding, also secret recruitment program by the Soviet Union is described by Lance Kokonos and Ian Johnson in their work on the forgotten scientists, the Germans in the Soviet Union, and a Russian space website which describes Soviet rocket research in Germany immediately after the war. Both the Soviet Union and the United States embarked on serious missile development programs immediately after World War II. We shall see in a moment how they did that. Both countries recognized the coming importance of missile technology, particularly when they were also developing future nuclear weapons, which would become the future warheads. The US and Soviet missile and space programs, initially employing both German technology as well as the scientists who developed it, took different paths. In the US, many German rocketeers became well-known celebrities, such as Werner Van Braun. In the Soviet Union, according to a history by Chief Deputy Designer Boris Chertok, as published by NASA, his boss, the head of the entire Soviet space program, Sergei Korolev, was unknown and unrecognized. After the war, both the United States and Soviet Union moved the majority of their recruited German scientists and engineers to their respective countries. While the visibility of the missile and space programs was used by both countries to showcase their accomplishments and promote their respective economic and political systems. The United States maintained relatively open missile and space development programs, as described by author Erich Lichtblau in his descriptive work, The Nazis Next Door: How America Became a Safe Haven for Hitler's Men. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, maintained tight secrecy over its program, using the launches themselves as documentation of their progress. Given the visibility of these programs, both countries attempted to promote their successes as an indication of their respective political and economic competitive advantages. When the Soviet Union successfully launched the first ICBM, Western analysts were skeptical, until the launch 2 months later of the world's first artificial satellite. The launch of the Sputnik satellite by the Soviet Union, prior to the United States launching their own, and as detailed in part by NASA historian Asif Siddiqui in his description of the Soviet space program and how it was initially helped by the Germans, provided a jolt to the United States that was electrifying in its intensity. US papers, as exemplified here, literally screamed headlines about the Russians owning space and that we were falling way behind. Those headlines reverberated throughout the world, as well as throughout the US government, our educational system, and probably cost Richard Nixon the presidency in 1960 as Kennedy ran on his proclaimed missile gap issue. As shown by newspaper headlines around the world and the internal reactions within the United States, Soviet rocketry, and by extension Soviet technology, was a very visible factor around the world in the promotion of each competitive system and in the competition between the two superpowers. The effect was demonstrable and resulted in tectonic political reactions within the United States, and as previously noted, was at least in a significant part exploited by John F. Kennedy as the missile gap to help him win the 1960 presidential election. As we will see later, in reality, there was no missile gap, but there was a visibility gap. The competition in space, which assumed almost a life of its own during the Cold War, did have some warning periods. In 1975, for example, the US and USSR cooperated in launching a manned satellite link-up in space, the Apollo-Soyuz program. This required a degree of information sharing which neither country had been willing to do prior to that mission. During this time, the US far outpaced the Soviet Union in space through its completion of its unchallenged Apollo moon program. Also by NASA historian Asif Siddiqui is a hidden history of why the Soviet Union dropped out of the moon race, information we did not know prior to 1991. At the end of the Cold War, during another warming period, the United States and the new Russian Federation signed a cooperative treaty for space exploration. One result of that was the International Space Station. According to author Erich Lichtblau, who presented and discussed the work done by the Germans brought to the United States after World War II, in his reference called The Nazis Next Door, starting with the V2, which is shown on the left of this slide, They helped the United States develop both military hardware and civilian portions of the space program, including many scientific exploration as well as the Apollo moon rockets, namely Saturn I through V. Shown here to scale with the V2 is the Saturn V. Also, for a size reference in the development is the International Space Station, a development of both the United States and the former Soviet Union. A complete representation of the Statue of Liberty, including its base, is shown as a size reference. A progression of years is also shown for a sense of how rapid the program was. Without the World War II Germans working on both sides, this never could have happened in this time frame. Speculating on the current state of the now renewed political rivalry of the United States and the new Russian Federation, and bringing the rise of China into the mix, we can face another period of rivalry and competition which may equal or even possibly surpass that of the Cold War. Only time and the hopeful wisdom of the participants will determine the final outcome. The following are the primary references used in the development of this presentation. I'd like to thank all the authors and the research that they did upon which this work is based.